remove this constraint that I will do something only if it gives me an immediate return. That, I think, is a very transactional view of education, which is what happens when people say that, okay, I've done this, now let me maximize.
Can I stay in integrity with myself and then take that externally to where my brand now matches?
Your brand should actually be giving credibility and power to the organization that employs you.
Brand, to me, is what are people saying about you behind closed doors, right? How are they describing you?
And the influence.
Dinesh, you know when you walk into a room full of people and there's a couple that stand out in the crowd and you just think to yourself, I've got to talk to this person. Yeah?
Yeah, you could feel their energy across the room.
1,000%. That is the experience I had when I met today's Happy and Human podcast guest.
Wow.
Huge room full of people. Nobody knew each other. And everybody's a little tentative, not sure what to expect. And this person it was not anything that they said or did per se. It was just a really quiet, magnetic energy that really drew me in for more conversation and at least wanting to start a conversation. So I'm so thrilled that today we have this person here. And the other thing I love about our guests, Dinesh, every single one has just such an amazing list of accomplishments. So I'll give you an example. And not only this person has published not one, but 5 books varying from fiction.
Six
Books. I miscounted. 6 books. Some are fiction, some are nonfiction, some are illustrated by this person themselves. They have headed learning and development globally at Microsoft and also held positions at PepsiCo, Colgate, and Tata Steel. Described as Forbes one of most India's interesting globalists. Has acted in plays, has a podcast, was a regular columnist for the Economic Times, and is currently teaching doctoral candidates at UPenn. Guys, welcome to the show, Abhijit Bhaduri. Thank you so much for being here.
Abhijit,
thank you
welcome.
So much for having me. Thank you. Thank you so much, Seema and Dinesh. Thank you.
Yeah, we're thrilled as we were preparing for this episode. I would also add to your list of accomplishments is thought leader and philosopher, because you have a way of seeing things around us and distilling them into actually comprehensible, tangible, and relatable pieces of information. And I think, listeners, if you get a chance, Google Abhijit's name, put it into YouTube, and you'll come across some of his videos that are absolutely interesting. And I was looking at his book, Career 3.0, and on Amazon, you could sort of like scroll a couple pages, and I went through a couple pages, and then it said, buy it right now. And so I bought it right now. And I think it's a fantastic book. So Abhijit, welcome. We're grateful that you're spending some time with us. We're looking forward to picking your brain and learning about all the things that you're an expert on.
Thank you so much for having me. That's a very kind introduction. Thank you.
Yeah. So Seema, how did you meet Abhijit?
So Abhijit and I were in a public speaking masterclass together. And so a few weeks ago, early April, I went to New Jersey and was decided, I'm public speaking a little bit more. This podcast thing is starting to take off a little bit. Maybe I should improve my craft. And so I was in this public speaking group, and it was just an incredible conglomeration of people. Abhijit, what did you think about it? All the people there and the experience.
Oh, I thought it was such a lovely group of people. Everybody comes with such diverse backgrounds and across industries. So I really enjoyed my time there, and learning from others is just so powerful.
I think so too.
I loved it. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is that of the 3 people here, 2 have done a public speaking masterclass, and I'm going to try to do a somewhat gooder job. Right.
Well, or you started out way before Abhijit and I, and so you're like way ahead of us, which
That
is
is a
Yeah, he
great.
lie.
doesn't need to do it.
He
No,
doesn't
No,
need
he
to
no,
do
doesn't
that
it.
need
is a
to do
lie.
it.
In full disclosure, I've seen how much how well you both speak, so I'm going to be doing it in a couple of weeks here, I think.
Yeah, you're gonna love it. It's gonna be so much fun for you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Abhijit, you've done, as I said in the intro, you've done so much. What I didn't mention was the TED Talks that Dinesh you kind of briefly touched on, but you really are um you've got a lot of different diverse skill sets. And so I'm just curious, how did that come to be?
Seema, I think it's a question that all of us have multiple things that we need to do. And, it's like you have a very impressive background of being a dentist, and then you sort of become a life coach and you're a podcaster. And so you're also using different skills. So I think so
Mhm.
does, Dinesh has a background in law and he's running a firm and then he's a podcaster. Most of us do many different things. So
Mhm.
it's not a big deal, really. All of us do it.
I think there was a time though that I didn't do it. Right. And there's so many of our listeners who are maybe just now starting out and saying, all right, I did the law school thing. I did the dental school thing. And now I'm feeling a little stuck. I'm feeling a little unfulfilled because I followed the
Mhm.
recipe and I think I might have missed the mark. So I'm just curious, you mentioned in your TED Talk too that you weren't always a writer. In fact, it was one of the furthest things from your mind, right? So just can you share with the listeners a little bit about how you've connected these dots?
So I think, the way I look at the process of writing is a byproduct of how much you read. So I used to, read a fair bit.
Mm,
I was a very quiet kid. I didn't have too many friends growing up because my father was in a transferable job. So before we settled down in one place, sometimes in a matter of a couple of months, he used to do a lot of projects for the government. And so we used to move from place to place. And before I would sort of really get to know the people in the school, we were off to a different place. So I didn't really end up having too many friends while I was growing up. And
mm,
therefore, for me, books were really everything. So I started to read a lot, and I read across multiple languages. So I spoke Bengali and Hindi at home.
mm.
In school I learned English, so I read in all three languages and read a
Wow.
fair bit, and then you kind of begin to do translations and begin to read all of that. And so one thing in our home there was always an abundance of is lots of magazines and lots of articles, and people would discuss, debate that. The radio used to be on. We used to listen to all of that and discuss that. So it was, constantly we were talking about something that we had read or heard. So that
Mm,
actually
Mhm.
becomes part of. In some sense, you have two phases. One is when you collect the dots, and then you connect the dots.
Mhm.
So I think
ah,
for a long time I was collecting the dots, doing different things. And
Mhm.
then you kind of begin to realize that they're all connected in some shape or form. And the moment that happens, you start to write. Writing is the process of really sharing your discovery of how something has made sense to you or not made sense to you. Both ways, you can write about both.
Mhm.
So I started writing for my school magazine. After I had published a couple of them, I got a little more ambitious. I started sending my articles to newspapers and some of the drawings and all that stuff. So that used to get published, and that gave me a lot of encouragement that I could start writing on a regular basis.
Mhm.
And I think it's a little bit like you develop that writing muscle. It's a lot like
mhm,
going to the gym. You work out a certain number of hours,
Mhm.
you have something to show for it. I think it's the same thing with writing. So you just write a little bit, and then it gives you the confidence because you work with editors who improve your craft. You
Mhm.
get feedback from the readers, they improve your craft. And so
mm,
it's the same process that I've just stuck to it because I enjoy it so much.
mm.
Did you ever, very early on in your in your writing. Did you ever have the thought that who am I to be writing this out there or putting this out there, or who's ever going to read this?
Yeah, I think it's a two-phase process because, when you write in your own diary, for example, you're really writing for yourself.
Hmm.
And so it's pretty unfiltered. So I used to write a diary. And then obviously, when you write for an external reader or a publication, the publication has a voice.
Mm,
So your first response is to actually write, for that publication. So, you kind of, for example, if I say that you're writing for a particular magazine, if I say
Hmm.
you're writing for The Economist, that's different from, say, writing for Vanity Fair. So
Hmm.
the two different styles, two different kinds of audience. So you begin to actually discover the audience through the voice of the magazine. So the
mm,
voice as you have interpreted it. And then if that resonates, they ask you to come back and write some more. So then, that's how you begin to do columns and all that. So then you've understood the audience, you've understood the voice of the publication, and you're writing for them.
mhm.
So I think
Hmm.
then it's a happy kind of
Yeah,
a alignment. That's how I would
Interesting.
describe it.
yeah, makes sense. That's a good explanation.
Yeah, it's almost I remember when I first started writing and it felt really strange, especially when you talk about things that are maybe a little bit more personal or it's truly in that creative process. I know some of your work is fiction and you kind of question, is this good? Does this make sense? And I think just putting pen to paper, just
Mhm.
that act of doing it is pretty cathartic. And so for you to have done so, not only with words, but then also in the form of sketching and illustration, and to do it with such perceived ease, I'm sure it wasn't always easy for you, but it looks like you've just really developed this craft with such ease, and you do it so well.
Yeah,
Oh, that's so nice
definitely.
of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Uh,
We talked about all the books that you wrote and the columns and all of that stuff. If
mhm.
if you could design, and you're also very invested in personal branding and developing an online voice and things like that. If you could
Mhm.
design what someone who's never met you before to implant in their brain what they should think about you or how they should think of you, what would that sentence be like? What would you want someone who's never met you to know you for?
Well, I would say that it depends on the forum where they would
Mhm.
discover. So if it's on LinkedIn, I kind of describe myself as a talent strategist who uses the neuroscience
Mhm.
behind talent management. So that's what I would say. But otherwise, I would sort of really say describe myself as a person who's a curious person who loves to explore the world around. That's how I
Mm.
would see myself.
Mm, okay.
But personal brand has a lot to do with, one of the ways to think about it is your personal brand is really some of the adjectives that people
Mhm.
use to describe you.
Yeah.
Um, and your degree of self awareness, if it is high, then it means that the words you use to describe yourself will be
Mhm.
the same ones that most of the people around you would describe you as.
Mhm.
Hmm.
The more apart they are, the less self awareness you have about how the
Yeah.
world sees you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think I would say creativity is one part of me, which I think through all the writing and the drawing and speaking that I do, that comes through. Curious because I write about a number of different things. I write about movies. I write about talent management. I write about um, I've written fiction, so travelogues, all kinds of things. So I experiment with a bunch of things. My interests are sort of acted in theater, I've acted in films, I've written. So the range of things, that's another thing. So I
Yeah.
think those are the kind of things. But would also perhaps people would feel that you really don't have a focused approach to doing anything specific in life. Is that so? So that could also be one conclusion people could draw that.
Yeah. Well, the talk that's coming to mind is your TED talk about the or versus the and people.
Mhm.
Uh, you did a beautiful job. And I know, Dinesh, we've talked about this as a leadership tool, as a communication tool, when you are trying to come up with a solution, maybe that's a difficult situation to navigate. We've talked about the importance of using the word "and" instead of being exclusionary to "or." And you've taken it and really sort of applied it to how you live life as almost like a life philosophy, is what I'm hearing you say.
It is. I mean, when you sort of look at all of us, as human beings contain multitudes. We have so many different elements to it. We have different roles. And each of these roles actually sort of really draws on one particular strength of ours, and you leverage that to fulfill that role. So as you are looking at, this and philosophy, the more you are able to integrate that, the more fulfilled you are. Because take a very simple example. Most of us, give up all the little hobbies that we had while we were growing up. So let's say you used to play a game in school. Now you kind of say, I'm too old to do all this. So you kind of really start giving up a lot of things. Then you become busy at work and you say, I have no time to do it. And then you have your family commitments and all that. For a variety of reasons, we start giving up a lot of what we do. But imagine how rich it would be if we could keep all of those things. So I have retained all the things that I used to do in school. I still do it now. So I find it extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
And if you are able to bring that into the work that you do, that's really fascinating, because then it really creates a very unique version of you. I mean, so for example, um, a lot of people use slides. I use all my drawings in my slides. So that just makes it fairly unique. People have someone to illustrate their articles. I illustrate my own articles. So I can, bring in yet another element that I can do. And, I love editing the videos. And so I sometimes will do my own videos, put that out. And so, I kind of do it not in terms of something which is compartmentalized, but I try and, as and when I want to leverage a particular skill or an idea, I bring that in and blend all the other things into what I do. So if I've traveled, I'll take a photograph and write about that, so I'm doing that.
Yeah, no, it's great. It reminds me of something I once heard that said, without a vision, having multiple interests is shiny object syndrome. But with a vision, it's curiosity, right? And I think we're in a time of and an economy where being an intelligent generalist is more valuable than being a specialized sort of professional. And I think you highlighted that with what you just said about being able to illustrate your articles, and your speaking ties into your writing, and your writing ties into your speaking, and everything that you're doing. So I think that one of the things that we've noticed, that Seema and I've noticed, is many South Asians haven't quite made that switch yet, especially in our generations where, they've gone to school for something, they were thinking of doing that. But then the question that pops up is, like you said, I don't have time, but what's the point, right? Like, why should I do that? And they're unable to quite articulate for themselves the strategic benefits that might come from doing some writing, or, learning a new skill, or anything else. What would you say to someone like that who might be listening, and to help them see that, expanding your horizons, trying different things has benefits beyond actually the thing that you're doing?
A lot of times the stuff that you do doesn't necessarily pay back in the immediate thing. I mean, I can think of so many examples. I did a degree in law, which, but I never practiced law. So the whole thing that people would say, what's the point of wasting 3 years? I didn't waste 3 years. I quite enjoyed that. I learned about, different aspect of life, which I would have never known. And I made great friends. I had a wonderful time. So now, if you sort of really ask me, what was the point of doing a degree in law? Today, as a freelancer, the advantage is that I can, read through the contracts that I have to sign with every client that I'm working with. and I can, seamlessly do all of that, or I can read through all the legal documents, and I can scan that and sort of say that, okay, this works well. This is how I would change the phrase. So I can do all that. So a lot of things that you do sometime in your life don't necessarily pay back in the short run.
Right.
So, but if you kind of remove this constraint that I will do something only if it gives me an immediate return, that I think is a very transactional view of education, which is what happens when people say that, okay, I've done this, now let me maximize and sort of get the best out of this.
Right.
But your real value comes from just really holding a bunch of different things, because then that is a far richer mix.
Yeah.
That is what I think I would say, that for anyone listening in, that don't sort of start to do something with the intent that this is how I'm going to use it, because you might find a much bigger play in what you're doing. I mean, I used to do a lot of work with the radio while I was growing up. The radio at that point of time never paid well, but I really enjoyed doing it, and I did it for the love of it. At the point of time when podcasting became a thing, many years later,
Yeah.
when podcasting became a thing, I said, oh my God, this is like the radio done in a different format altogether. So,
Yeah.
and, I was like straight off the bat, and I could monetize my podcasts and sort of sell it to a bunch of people. Well before this entire space became very crowded. So I think those are some of the benefits. You will use all of it. It's just that don't start doing it because you have a particular path in mind. It'll come up in a different form. I didn't know what podcasting was when I was doing my work with the radio, but just did it because I loved it.
So, what comes to mind, because you talk about talent management, you talk about career transitions and career 3.0, something that is really prevalent, particularly in the South Asian population, as I understand it, is we are excellent transactional learners. And we go to school, we do the thing, we get the degree, and we're great. There's an abundance of entry-level positions that we start out as. And then what you see as you go through the hierarchical progression of a company is the South Asian population tends to fall off. And the result is, there's a lot of frustration. Why am I not getting hired? Why am I not getting promoted? Because there's a whole missing piece that you just touched on here, which was what makes you uniquely you and indispensable to this company. So when you're there in this position, and I know I can send you a document and say, oh, I don't need to wait for our legal counsel to go through this letter because I know he's kind of got enough, right? He can at least kick the ball forward a little bit more. The kind of leadership skills that are required by basically being bold enough to look stupid, try new things, not be a master at something, and amalgamate it into this unique person that now really becomes almost infiltrated in a powerful scaffold for the company. That's what tends to be missing in the South Asian population. What are your thoughts?
I think that, when you come up with a mindset of scarcity, you try to make the most of whatever you are given, So the whole deal is that, if I've got a degree in this, I'm going to make the most of it, and which is legit, because you are working with scarce resources. So it sort of makes sense. You're very frugal about what you do. But what happens is, in reality, actually, the more you let go and find connections, whether with the subject or with people, you actually begin to realize that the possibilities exponentially increase. So, for example, if you're doing today, if you look at the opportunities that are coming up, a lot of them are coming up in areas which are a combination, biochemistry, it's biology and chemistry.
Yeah.
You have robotics and ethics combined, that, what are the ethics that we'll have when you design? So that's design and robotics and ethics. So people who are able to, that's where the world is today, So my book, Career 3.0, actually taps into this whole zeitgeist, which says that, you need to actually embrace many more, a multidisciplinary mindset. So
Yeah.
therefore, don't just get limited by that, because we kind of say, even with soft skills, I remember hearing this a lot, that, oh, if you really have skills, they are the hard skills. You know how to do coding, that's a skill. The rest is fluff.
Mm.
Actually, the opportunity to build value out of the intangible things is the real power. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. Apple makes a particular product, and it charges a premium because of the value of the brand,
Mm-hmm.
the brand Apple. So there could be another company which is making something cheaper, faster, better, more powerful, all of that.
Yeah.
But your trust is built in the brand. And so, therefore, this branding, these intangible things,
Yeah.
until you begin to understand, you don't realize that in the 80s, 85% of the value of the goods, that were being sold, 85% of the value was intangible assets. What
Mm-hmm.
is how many buildings did you have? How many factories did you have? How many cars do you produce? But
Mm-hmm.
since then, the value has actually moved into the intangible areas. So it's really all about things that are difficult to count and measure.
Yeah.
Your brand, your trust level, your ability to learn things. There is no way to measure it. I mean, and we struggle, which is what you
Mm-hmm.
see organizations struggling with, that it's very hard to measure um, trust in the brand, but
Yeah.
that's the billions. So when you trust somebody, when a certain person who you have heard of, when
Mm-hmm.
this person offers you a job, you're much more likely to say yes if you've
Yeah.
heard really great things, and that's the positive brand connotation. So your personal brand matters so much more when you are actually in a competitive environment. If there is more than one provider for whatever you are doing, you need to have a strong brand.
Mm-hmm.
Higher education is a good example of that. That
Mm-hmm.
all the colleges, they compete for funds, they compete for students, they compete for faculty, they compete
Yeah.
for all the jobs that employers have to offer. But none of them really spend enough time and energy building the brand, because
Mm-hmm.
you build the brand through the people. So the
Mm-hmm.
professor must be known.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
if I say I teach at so and so place, both me and that organization stand to benefit. But what
Mm-hmm.
happens is, most people in the organization become insecure when they see one person gaining prominence, not
Yeah.
realizing the value of that brand actually rubs off on everybody.
Absolutely.
So that is the magic of it. And so if I say that I work for a company which you really think the world of, you automatically assume I must be really good. You have no idea whether I was the
Yeah.
lowest rated performer there or the top rated, but you
Yeah.
automatically assume that. So you get a massive advantage. It's so much easier to
Yeah.
find people to work for you when you're in a startup. And I
Mm-hmm.
work with so many startups. One of the big things that they have to grapple with is, how do I attract people to what I'm trying to build? What's my
Absolutely.
vision?
Yeah.
You are telling them a story. So your ability to do that, if you kind of think that, oh, story is all fluff, it's actually
Mm.
the product that you build. You could have the world's greatest product. If you don't have a wrapper of the story around, people will not buy it, no matter how good it is.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. I mean, Simon Sinek says people buy why you do something, not what you do.
yeah,
And I think you're right. I think, you talk about soft skills, and we've mentioned that, the soft is an inappropriate term to describe those
Yeah.
skills, right? Because
it's the
those are the
human
skills,
skills. I prefer the, yeah.
yeah,
Human
human
skill is a better word, I think.
or core skills or whatever, but in
Power
by no
skills,
means,
yeah.
yeah, no means are they less important than the technical skills. And I think where we are now with generative AI and LLMs, those types of, discrete skills such as coding or
Mm.
proofreading or generating a first draft, those are the skills that are being outsourced, not only to machines and computers, but to other parts of the world, right? Like right now, we have an editor that I have an editor that's in Iran, for example, right, who is able to do things and all of that. And I absolutely agree with you. I think branding is the currency of the new future. It isn't your skill set. It isn't even the brand of your alma mater, where you went to school or what you worked, because
Yeah, it
what
does.
people what people are looking for is like, yeah, sure, you work for Apple, or sure, you work for Google, but what is it about you that
Mhm.
you will bring to our organization, right?
Mhm.
Both in the
And,
micro
and
and micro level.
I would actually say that, there is a point of time when you get into an organization at the entry level,
Hmm.
um, you are more dependent on the brand of the organization.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
Correct.
you draw on the brand of the organization. But
yeah.
there comes a point of time where, by the time you have a couple of years under your belt, I think your personal brand should be just as powerful. And then as you become more experienced and senior and in the senior leadership of the organization, your brand should actually be giving credibility and power to the organization that employs you. So,
Mm.
that is the true power of the brand. That let me just ask you, how many people, who's the number two of Tesla? And chances are that you don't know, but you know Elon Musk, or
Mhm.
Uh, so I think the power of a brand is between the two people. If the second person goes across to raise funds,
Yeah.
the outcome is going to be very different from if a person with a strong personal brand goes to, raise funds or hire people. Um, that's the world we live in, and
Mm.
the sooner people understand that, the more they can actually work to build their presence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question to you is, it's easy to dismiss personal branding as something that you market, right? A
Mhm.
logo, something external. But talk more about what that means. A personal brand that could be relevant for the stay-at-home mom just as much as the CEO. What is it that makes up a personal brand? And how is it that, because you work with a lot of people on just this very thing, so what are the challenges that you see most people come across as they look to develop their personal brand?
Mhm.
So one way to describe personal brand is to say that, if you sort of did a very simple exercise of um, describing yourself, write down three adjectives
Hmm.
that you think people use to describe you by. And then you go around and ask people, give me three adjectives you would say, use to describe me.
Hmm.
If those match, so let's imagine one out of those three matches. Everyone uses that one, but nobody gets the other two.
Hmm.
Those are the two other elements that don't come through as prominently in your work. On
Mhm.
the other hand, what people say about you also is a very powerful way in which you understand that this is what my brand is conveying.
Hmm.
But is this what you want to convey? For
Mhm.
example, at different levels in the organization, you want to be known for different things. So at an entry level, I want to be the person um, who has the know-how. I can pick up things. I can
Mhm.
do this. I
Hmm.
can, get and fix this. And I'm the first one to pick up something new and do that. At the mid-level, you should be building a brand which is evolved around delivering. You have execution ability.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
you've already built that. You know how to do stuff, but you can execute against a business priority and say, okay, I will deliver this project within this time. And
Mhm.
you also build the capability of, grooming a team.
Yeah.
When you're in the senior leadership level, you should be able to move from the know how and know what to the know why.
Mhm.
That, why do things happen this way? Can I articulate it? Why are people comfortable with my organization and not with the others? And how am I different? What's my vision for the future? So, all the intangible things. So, if you really see, your personal brand starts to depend more on the intangible factors as you become more
Mhm.
experienced. And for a lot of people, when they start working, if they work with a very well known brand, they feel no need to do that until that brand gets taken away from them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Hmm.
People change jobs, they want to go solo, they get laid off, can be a bunch of different reasons.
Hmm.
That's when people start to say, and so many people, you know, come in at a point of desperation because, it can be that I've just started my firm, but I'm
Yeah.
unable to find anyone to work with me, as in a client. And that's because, it's very hard to get discovered if you don't have a history of discoverability built in. You have not done anything, to build it. And that is why, if you have a transactional view of relationships and work, that's when it really backfires. Because if the first time when I call you and say, hey, Dinesh and Seema, lovely to meet you. And the second sentence, I demand something, a favor from you. I can guarantee you that you are never going to return that phone call, But if we have worked together, or, we've known each other for a while, and you build an ability to connect with each other, that's a time when you say, hey, you know what? I can't do anything for you, but I know somebody who can really do something for you.
Absolutely.
So you make those connections. So I think the world of give and take works because the word give comes first. You give into a relationship without any transactional view. Once you are able to do that, it all comes right back to you in manyfold. So the same principle happens with skills. You read something, you pick up a skill, you may not find a buyer right now, but trust me, it'll come back magnified, So that was the radio example which I shared. Radio to podcasting was that, it just sort of the returns were manifold for me. When you think about writing, I wrote for years together, at a pittance. Like I was writing for newspapers simply because I just wanted to learn about the craft of writing, and got feedback from the editors and picked up all of that. One fine day when it becomes a book, it gives you a certain kind of a return. Or you do whatever you do. Life is really a lot about compounding your skills, whichever way. It's about compounding your brand. You compound, and through that consistent delivery, you build your brand. That here is a person, chances are that for anybody with a strong personal brand, all the adjectives will be the same. If I say Mother Teresa, and you talk about compassion, charity, whatever, we are all going to say roughly the same things. So people with strong personal brands, good or bad, even the most evil person, chances that you and I are going to use the same adjectives to describe the person. So whether you consciously shape it or not, your personal brand follows you. It really makes sense for you to actively work with somebody to help you craft that and articulate that. So it's a two phases. You discover what your brand is all about, you find a way to articulate it, and then you build it into everything that you do. So that's the very simple perspective on personal branding. Gosh, that's a really long answer.
I think it's great. I think it was great.
Yeah. And, you mentioned having a vision. And then you also mentioned, what are characteristics or things that are elements of my brand that I would want to come through. So for someone who's maybe kind of waking up now to saying, oh my gosh, I really want to develop and strengthen my personal brand, where would you suggest they start out? Would it be building that vision first, or talking about building, identifying those character traits and going out and doing almost like a 360 review of how accurate is my self-perception?
Yeah, self-awareness is always a very strong place to start. So, if you get started with that, and then there are lots of places where you can learn about it in a sort of structured way. The advantage of learning in a structured way is that it cuts your exploration time, that, you are not sort of really going in 5 different directions. It's really like having a roadmap, and it tells you this is the shorter route, this is the more scenic route. So you can decide to choose one of the two. That's the advantage of that. There are books which are written. In fact, funny, as we speak, I'm offering a course on this platform called creatives.io, creativs.io, where I'm telling people how do you build your brand on LinkedIn by simply using your content, everything that you post. So from the way that you write your resume, your headshot, your summary description, the way you describe your experiences, to the post that you write, the likes and things that you post, the recommendations that you offer, the recommendations that you get, the people that you follow, all of it together can be crafted in a certain kind of a way to get the maximum mileage for you. So I think there are multiple ways to do it, but there are so many people offer the opportunity to teach you how to do that.
Yeah.
So you can work with a coach who can help you. You can do a course. You can read books. Multiple ways to do it.
Sure.
So, this guy, Stephen Bartlett, he's got a podcast, Diary of a CEO. He wrote a
Yeah.
book, Diary of a CEO. And in there, he had 33 laws. I'm not sure if you read it, but he talks about his prior life where he was a marketing CEO of a marketing agency. And they made a little bit of money. And the first thing they did in their new office was to put a big blue slide, right? I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about. But the slide was absolutely not functional, right? No one was able to use the slide. But it was the reason that everyone came to know about them. And every article was like, this marketing agency has this big slide. And then he goes on to talk about Tesla, for example. Like when we talk about Tesla, we think about Elon Musk. And the point he was trying to make is that people tend to remember the absurdity. If you think about what Elon stands for, the big blue slide or things like that. And when we talk about building a brand online, a lot of times people think that you have to generate a controversy or take a side or create some type of absurd position to where you can create a bit of space for you to get visibility because there's so much stuff out there, right? And a lot of people are making posts on LinkedIn or on Instagram or wherever simply for the attention to grow, because otherwise, the algorithm won't show it to you or whatever. What would you say to someone who is trying to build a brand online, regardless of the platform, but maybe is thinking that, that's not me. I don't want to say absurd things. And whatever I'm saying doesn't seem to get people interested. It sort of just falls flat. What would you say if you take all that, if there's a question somewhere in there? I'm sure there is. I'll put a question mark. What would you say to that?
Yeah. I think when you there are two different elements. One is to get attention. The other is to build influence. They're two different things. So, if I did something crazy, somebody talking about jumping off a cliff, that video is going to, get a lot of views. You put a picture of, a baby laughing and giggling, it'll get a lot of views. It'll get a lot of, so when somebody says, this is a tragedy that happened with me, you get a lot of views. You have to really ask yourself, what is it that you want to be known for? And so that people have tried many different things. Very recently, there's somebody who posted a video about dying, that this person is dead. And that sort of generated a lot of media hype for, 24 hours. And then the person said, haha, fooled you. I'm not dead. Nothing happened to me. This is like this. You can play this trick once.
Yeah.
And then for the rest of your life, you're going to really find it very, very, very hard to be taken seriously. Now, if that's the brand you want to build, this is just the perfect thing for you to do.
Yeah.
If that's not, and what you do on a professional platform and what you do outside, in today's world, people, it's a very connected world. So, if today, let's say somebody, goes and does something crazy outside, and that appears on social media, and it does always. Truth will come to haunt you, whether in 2 days or 2 hours or 20 years, it will come back. And on the internet, there is no delete button. So, whatever you're putting out there, somebody has taken a screenshot and will bring it back and say, hey, guess what? This is what you said. What about this? So I think it always sort of comes back. It's a bit like every post of yours is like a tattoo.
Yeah.
And can you get rid of a tattoo with some difficulty? Yes, it's a painful process. But if you have your body covered with tattoos, hard to forget that.
And painful. And painful.
Very painful.
Very, very
Right.
painful.
Painful.
Trust me.
Yeah.
Yes. I know some people who've talked about how horrendous it was to get rid of a tiny tattoo somewhere on the hand. And they said, oh gosh, I'm so glad that it wasn't something crazy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think that is great advice about generating attention, day trading attention, as Gary Vee likes to talk about, and actually building a brand. And the brand to me is, what are people saying about you behind closed doors, right? How are they describing you?
and the
And
influence, and the influence.
yeah,
So if you say that, which is why, um, what you endorse, what you stand for, you have to be very careful. So some time back, there was a sports channel which wanted me to endorse them on LinkedIn. And I said I wouldn't want to do that. And they said, but why not? I think what happens is anybody who knows me knows that these are two different planets. Sports and me are not on the same planet. But I can talk about books because I read a lot. I can talk about that. And I can say this is right, wrong, good, bad. I watch a lot of films. I listen to a lot of music. So there are things I can talk about. I meet a lot of interesting people. I can talk about that. I travel a lot. I can talk about that. Sports, I don't. Financial advice, I don't. I mean, it's not something I know enough to be able to say, oh, this is good and this is bad. And
sure.
if people trust you, it's really like if you're a dentist, Seema, would you really turn back and say, hey, listen, I've got a fracture in my hand. You should be able to tell me enough to be able to fix that. You wouldn't
Yeah.
do it.
I wouldn't.
And if, hopefully you wouldn't.
I would
The-
not.
and
Would
the-
not.
no, no, yeah, that's the whole point of trust. And Dinesh, you wouldn't sort of advise somebody on, the laws of cricket if you've never played
Yeah.
cricket. You know,
No.
so it's just that. So
Yeah.
your credibility and influence actually comes from people being able to trust what you say. They
Absolutely.
know that you've thought it through, you've done the research for them, you're making
Yeah.
things easier for them. You're
Yeah.
not putting them in a bind by peddling something, which is what a lot of, more recently, you may have read about the number of financial, influencers who peddle a lot of financial products.
Yeah.
They sold off the stock that, they were advising people should buy. And, so those are the kind of things which really ruin your credibility.
Absolutely. We've been talking a lot about personal branding. And when I talked about earlier, I said, it is what people say about you behind closed doors. You very astutely pointed out that it's also your influence. And I agree with you. But I want to, we talk about mindset and about thoughts and things here. And I want to turn this conversation internal. Talk to us about the brand and our personal brand with ourselves. In other words, the thoughts about what we think about ourselves, like what is our brand, how do we reconcile the brand that we have with ourselves, and the reliability and the credibility of I can think of some thoughts that people might have, like, it never works, it's not for me, I just don't have what it takes, or I'm not lucky, whatever story we have, and that brand has stuck. Talk to us a little bit about that. And I think what you said also earlier, that we all have a brand. It's out there. Even if someone looks you up on LinkedIn, they find nothing. That is a brand, right? That you're not active in the space, or you have nothing to say. You're not a thought leader, right? Things like that. So talk to us about that, because I think we all have a brand, and subconsciously that brand is guiding us. What we think about ourselves are guiding us, and what can we do to maybe steer that brand in a direction that's more empowering, that serves us?
I think that's such a fabulous question. I would sort of say that the word brand is more external facing,
Sure.
whereas when you turn inside, it's your own identity. The way you see yourself, the things that you define for yourself and say, I'm capable of this and not capable of this. And those are, again, opportunities for you to take them as challenges and not to use them as walls. So these are markers where you can extend your boundary further, rather than to say that this is the end of the road for me on that space. So if you sort of really look at it, I grew up with this whole notion that um, finance and me are not, this we are not friends. I don't understand finance. Finance is not for me. I grew up with that mindset. But there comes a time when you start to run your own firm. One of the first things you have to understand is,
Yeah.
are you making money? And I remember sitting down and reading a bunch of books and talking to a bunch of people to just simply understand that your sales turnover doesn't mean anything until you talk about cash in the bank. So cash flow. So that for me was a game changer in the way that I started to approach the way that I built that. And then, started to teach myself a little bit about that, a little bit about that. Each transaction, I would stop and say, okay, why did it
Yeah.
work like this? So what's the percentage of tax that I pay on this? So if I had to do that, this is how it would get grossed up. So if this gets grossed up, the hourly rate must be this instead of that. All those kind of decisions, you do it. How much would you pay somebody who helps you out? How much would you offer for a service? How much would we gross up for a tax? How much do you spend by way of a vacation? How much time do you give for yourself? All of this. When you're working for someone, a lot of these things get decided for you. But when you work for yourself, you decide everything for yourself. You are your CMO, you're your marketing person and your finance person and your talent advisor and everything else. So
Yeah.
that's the way you reshape your identity. Just on a different note, I mean, if you sort of look at so many people, um, when we are now hitting something called peak 65, where about 10,000 people in US hit 65, the age of retirement, every single day. When you look at that, one of the things that happens is we are living longer. We are all going to be living to be 100 or close to that.
Yeah.
And therefore, this notion of retiring at 65 is something that worked well when the lifespan used to be 70, 72.
Sure.
It varies. Yeah. So that was a great way. You work, then you take a couple of years to rest, relax, enjoy your time, ride off into the sunset kind of thing. Today, actually, people who work in the field of geriatrics define 60 as your young old age. And then they talk about a middle old age and an old senior old age, etc., all of that. These definitions are changing. But if your
Yeah.
mindset is, oh, I have another 5 years or 10 years to work and all of that, I mean, then you kind of think about life differently.
Yeah.
Imagine if you're 25 and you're going to live to be 100, you've got a 75-year or 70-year lifespan ahead of you to think about.
Yeah.
And so the way you think about that, the way you think about finance, the way you think about your health, the way that you think about your skills is very different.
Yeah.
Because in order to be able to stay relevant, your identity must evolve to say, I'm going to work to 100. I'm not going to retire. I'm
Yeah.
going to do something which is interesting. I will do many different things. Then that helps you to, think about your health differently, your mental cognitive capacity differently, your own identity differently. And, then you become a role model for many other people. So you first become a role model for yourself. You have to
Yeah.
change your identity and say, I am capable of doing this and I will do it differently.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's like a recipe for staying young, right? Is that
Absolutely.
constant learning, the constant curiosity, the constant willingness to say, how can I stay in integrity with myself and then take that externally to where my brand now matches and I'm authentic to that.
If your internal sense of who you are doesn't match your external brand, it leads to tremendous amount of stress. So
Yes.
the only way that you if you think you want to change the world outside, you have to change it inside first. So that's very important.
Yeah. Do you find that when you're working with clients on branding and things like that, is that where you start, or is that something, where is it in your process that this aha moment of, oh gosh, I've got to get into integrity with myself? Where
A
does that
lot of
show up?
times so initially when I do spend time with them, there are different models that people, depending on what you're trying to address, people actually, when they have thought about themselves, you ask them to describe themselves, that what is your brand going to be about? Where are you different? I mean, a lot of times it's a simple question. People get stumped because when they introduce themselves, they will always introduce themselves with the name of the organization or the position. So
Yeah.
I'd say, okay, let's leave that. I know you already are this. Who are you? And then the person would say, I'm an engineer. I said, and there are 1.5 billion engineers in the world.
Yeah.
How are you different? And then that very often gets in, gosh, I've never thought about that. And, I think I'm an adventurous person. So it really begins with a very wide open kind of
Hmm.
conversation. And then you narrow it down. Why do you say that you're adventurous? And the person will say, I did this. Is that the only time in your life? No, I've been doing it. Now you're onto something. So you kind of discover
Mm-hmm.
patterns and do all that. So
Yeah.
yes, it's a process of fascinating discovery, because until you sort that, you will not be able to live up to it. I mean, so you might
Yeah.
sort of say that, okay, I've worked out the next 5 posts on LinkedIn. I've got that. That's not going to build your brand. Your brand is not 5 posts. Your brand
Yeah.
is consistent behavior over a span of time.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was really good. That was a really good way of succinctly explaining what I was trying to ask. So thank you.
thank you.
Like I said, true thought leader to the T.
My God. Thank you.
So there was a talk that you had, I think, for Inc. and Company
Hmm.
or something like that, where you were.
Yeah, those are the TED Talks in India were called Inc. at a point of time. So yes,
Mm.
Oh, good, good, yeah. And you make a really good point about our perception of time, as opposed to relative across through generations, has changed. And you're talking about this fellow who was going for a job change, and he sat down next to you. And by the way, you said you make it a point to talk to people that you
I
interact with or you cross, and I think that's great. It's something I try to do too, and I can't tell you how beneficial it
I'm
is.
that person.
Yeah, what happens when we sit next to each other? I think we'll have a great
Oh
time.
gosh,
Yeah. Well, like Seema said in the
The,
beginning of the show, that you have that energy that magnetizes people. So I
yeah.
can believe it.
And, I think what would happen if the two of you sat next to each other is all the people around you would benefit because, they may not want to actually be the one engaging in the conversation because they get all caught up about, oh, who am I and blah, blah, blah. But people are nosy. They love eavesdropping on conversations. And I think when two thought leaders come together and are unafraid to really hold each other in integrity and space with compassion, you get this dynamic, magnetic, powerful conversation that then, people hear that goes out into the world and you never know whose life you're changing without you knowing
Uh,
it. So that's just what I think. But back to
y-
time.
no, you're too kind. But Abhijit, did you hear what she said? She said that whenever two lawyers get together and talk, people can't help but try to
people
listen.
people will take up the free advice.
They will. They will.
Yes, of course. I think
Oh,
so. I
Yeah.
think so.
Okay,
Uh,
let's get back to time. So this gentleman, I'll summarize the story. This gentleman sit down and he's going for a job change, and you're like, bro, you look like you just graduated. How have you changed your job? And he tells you that he's been working for a long time, and then he says it's been 7 months, right? And
mm,
I thought that in itself was insightful to see the definition, because other people might think when they're at a company a long time is 15, 20 years. So here,
mhm.
there's a younger man who is thinking 7 months was a long time. But then you took it a step further and you talked about how, based on our perception of time across generations, we need to be doing something, both professionally and personally, in our relationships. Do you want to tell us about how that insight came to you? What is the insight? And leave our listeners with some actionable strategies to really be happy and human in the relationships?
yeah, sure. So, this person, sort of when he said that I've been working here for a very long time and it was time to switch jobs. And in my head, I was kind of thinking years. And then when this person says, "Oh, I've been working for 7 months," it's been a very long time.
Yeah.
And then, I kind of, for a long time, I thought that was an exception until I spoke to a whole bunch of people, and they said, "Makes sense. I mean, I'm already bored. I worked for 4 months," and somebody said, "I worked for a year. I'm bored out of my wits. I'm doing the same thing again and again." And what has happened is we are in a space where, if you see a couple of older films and look at contemporary cinema, you would see the shots are much shorter, so the cuts are much quicker. And, so because the attention span, we don't no longer sort of linger on in a conversation. And, there are all kinds of, ideas that will keep coming to your head, and you kind of talk rapidly. So we are in an impatient world, and we are in a world where you're continuously looking at many different ideas coming to you at the same time. And which is why when I think about careers, people have, you get into a marketing job, you're doing just marketing, where people are really keen to do many other things. They want to try out many different things.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the missing element in organization. So my view would be that provide people multiple options to do projects in all kinds of unrelated areas. Most people like that. Very few people like to stick to one particular thing. Sometimes people like to do something adjacent within the function. I'm in
Sure.
treasury now. I'm going to sort of go and work in accounts receivable. So,
Yeah.
okay, I'll get a little bit of a different piece. Or I've been in law. Now I'm going to do something else, and say employment law specifically, and not property law. So it can be within the function, but in adjacent. Many people today, the younger people, like to do many different things. So you kind of say that in my book, Career 3.0, you have people, as you see towards the end, there are people who've trained themselves to be architects. They're running, they're running an architecture firm. They've taught themselves coding. They're into design and equally accomplished in all of this. And they set up a restaurant, and they close a restaurant. And now they're traveling the world learning photography. This is what a lot of people are looking at today, rapidly collecting a diverse set of experiences. So, implication for this, for yourself, broaden the scope of things that you do today. So stop doing something only because it's going to, lead to an immediate payback. Don't do that. Explore widely. So try out many different things, because the world will change. If you see things which used to happen after 5 years, 10 years, today happens in weeks and days.
Absolutely.
GPT-4 was released the other day, and now it is 4.0, which got released. So and each time it's a quantum shift.
Yeah.
You will see your apps on the phone, they get updated every couple of days, it's updating itself. That's the world we live in. So change your skill set often, change your worldview often. Assumptions that you had about the world may not always be true today. So the more you are able to do that, the more opportunities you create for yourself. So that's your second thing. The third thing that I would say is to be able to give feedback to people, especially if you're working with younger people, younger or older, more experienced people. Make it a point to give more frequent feedback. That's always more helpful, because course correction is easier. Imagine that I need to travel north and I'm going northeast. If you told me in the first 100 meters, it's a non-issue for me to just do a little bit of a swerve and move back on course. But if you told me after we've traveled 100 miles, I would say, why didn't you tell me before? It's just such a waste of my time.
Yeah.
So, the ability to do that quick, fast follow kind of a thing. People write a post, they look back and say, how many likes? We are in a world which is really all about instant feedback. So I think more experienced people need to really start adopting that mindset. The younger people have that mindset already. I think it's the more experienced people who need to make that shift. A good measure is, if you ask people how often you change the profile photograph, the younger kids change their photographs a couple of times a day. The older people change it, periodically
If
after a
they have
while.
one,
So I
if
think
they have a
If
if
they
they
have
have
profile
one
one.
photo,
Yeah.
yeah.
at
I
all.
think all that's great for the professional realm. What about in our personal realm with our relationships, like even friendships, or with kids, or spouses, or parents, or siblings? How has that change in the world we live in, that we're in a instant feedback world, um, dictate how we should approach those relationships?
I think, in most cases, the realm of topics that you can work with and talk about with friends and family and all of that, that has slowly expanded quite a bit. And
Mm-hmm.
then there are changes that are happening within the family in terms of little rituals and little shifts which are happening. So if you sort of really see, sociologically, there was a point of time when everybody ate at the same time in the same place,
Mhm.
had the same meal. It
Yeah.
was
Right.
shared. So let's say
Right.
if you have pasta today, everybody's eating pasta. But we are, and I kind of see that as much in India as I see it here with
Mm-hmm.
friends. There is no one fixed time. Somebody is doing intermittent fasting and they eat at 6. Somebody is doing this, they go to the gym, they'll eat at 7. Somebody is going to have a late night snack. Somebody likes chocolate after dinner. Somebody likes a fruit after dinner. So it has all got fragmented. And if
Yeah.
you sort of really look at that, in this world, more frequent feedback and communication becomes even more important, because otherwise you
Right.
drift apart. So I think it's important to be able to periodically get everybody together, build rituals around getting everybody together at the same time, if not every day, at least periodically, whatever works for you, to come together, sit at the same time without the phone, come and talk to each other, learn about each other's lives, and have that conversation.
Hmm.
That's what I think is very important to have.
Yeah.
Go back to shared meal, shared
Experiences.
time, shared space. Three
Yeah.
things.
Hmm. Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
I remember thinking of the Bollywood film, I think it's Hum Saath Saath Hai, where they're talking about the dad says, the family that eats together, prays together, stays together.
Mm-hmm.
And I just loved that. It's something that we really try to uphold and honor in our house, especially as the distractions just keep coming. We play a game on the show called Ask It Forward. I know you're a little bit familiar with what that means. But for listeners that are maybe brand new to the show, at Happy and Human, we have fantastic guests that come on and they have so much insight and so much wisdom to share.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the ways we do that, Dinesh and I are, and you are also a coach, we like to ask questions. We like to ask powerful questions that make us think so we can create different perspectives and create a richer life. So the guest before you has left a question for you, not knowing who you are, what the topic will be, when we'll be recording, any of that. We had conscious parenting coach Mansi Parekh leave you a question. So we'll ask that of you and then you'll answer.
Sure.
And then you'll get to ask a question forward for our next guest.
Excellent.
Ready to play? All right.
Yeah.
So
Love this idea.
Yeah, it's really fun. Mansi asks, what is your biggest fear, not phobia, in life? And how does it translate and unleash your biggest strength?
I think my biggest fear is becoming irrelevant, and therefore it sort of translates into my reading and continuously looking to stay current in what I do, try out different things and travel and sort of, see as much of life as I potentially can, and that's, I think, triggered in some sense by this whole thing that, I would hate to be irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my biggest fear and how it becomes a strength potentially.
So good.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I think a lot of people can relate to that, and it probably is the driving force behind, you know, um, what keeps people expanding themselves and pushing their boundaries and trying to learn new things. So that's a good answer. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah. So now you get to throw out a question for the next guest. What would you ask?
I would ask the person, what would you do if you didn't have to worry about the consequences?
What would you do if you didn't have to? You know what I think we should do is have the guests answer this question. I think we should have the person asking actually answer the question. Okay.
That's a good
I can't
question.
wait.
I would,
It's a good question.
okay, in my case, I would just shamelessly travel, 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 travel. There were no consequences of, carbon footprint and money,
Yeah.
and bookings and flights missed, and there were no consequences of any of that. I would just travel like a gypsy.
Yeah. That's a good answer.
Wanderlust.
For me,
Totally.
I'm thinking about that question, and for me, I would spend all the time fixating on the most obscure nuances or details. Like, I'm thinking of going snorkeling and really studying all of the fish there because there's no consequence of
Oh my
time or
God.
cost
Yeah.
or anything like that. And just go really deep into something and just allow yourself to let the curiosity take you to no end. I mean, another example is I would just stay on YouTube forever till I got to the end of it and watched everything because there's just so much to learn. There's just such a rich tapestry in the universe for us.
What I love about that is it allows you to become really, really present in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
When you're so focused on what kind of fish is that, and I'm looking at the striations and the patterns of the fish to distinguish between this type and that type, you really are creating an opportunity for you to be present. And when we are present, that's when we do our greatest work. That's when we actually unleash our, zone of genius, if you will. And there's a lot that happens as a result. So I love that answer.
Seema, what would you do if
Yeah.
there were
Seema,
no
your turn.
consequences?
I would travel, and I think I would spend a lot more time on my yoga mat exploring. Right now I'm working with a yoga therapist, and we're just sort of dismantling my entire practice. And I think that if I could just sit there on the mat and literally play with what it feels like to shift my weight and learn it in a way that is with self-compassion, and curiosity, it translates so deeply to life outside of the mat, life off the mat. Something that really comes through for me is, in order to make these really big external perceived shifts, that has to start from a very internal, actually very subtle shift. And that's
Hmm.
what I think I would really like to work on if I had no consequence of time.
I love it.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
The next question then is what's stopping us from doing all that stuff?
Mm.
Because the consequences that we're thinking of are probably not as large, right?
Right.
But that's for the next guest, I guess. We can
That
explore
is for the
that.
next
Yeah.
guest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Abhijit, you've taken time out of your busy schedule. You're spending time with us and sharing all of your wisdom. We're benefiting from it. Our listeners certainly will benefit from being exposed to you and absorbing your content. And listeners, I highly recommend you check out his book, Career 3.0. He makes some really good points that for us to stay relevant in the next 5 to 20 years, I think these are points that you should learn. But as a way of saying thanks to Abhijit, what Seema and I like to do on behalf of the Happy and Human podcast is make a small contribution to a cause that's near and dear to your heart. And that helps bring awareness to different causes and things like that, and allows us to ensure that even those who can't listen to the podcast or aren't even aware of the podcast can feel the impact of what we're trying to build here. So, with that, Abhijit, is there a cause, an organization, anything that we can make a small contribution to on your behalf?
Just send a couple of copies of the book to people who would benefit from it. I mean, I leave that to you, whoever that might be, because, our careers are getting reinvented, and hopefully all the research that I've put in and all the stories will help people. So if you can do that, that'd be absolutely great.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll even say is we'll put it live on the episode here. So, listeners, if you're listening to this and you send either Seema or I or a DM, then we'll send you a copy of Abhijit's
Yeah.
book. How about that?
Yeah.
And with any luck, we'll send out 50,000 copies.
Fantastic.